I'm actually going to start us with something fairly far back in the chapter, because I want to make sure we get to it. So if you have your textbook, go ahead and open to page 114. This kind of pulls together the interrelationship between some of the concepts we're working on, as well as gets us sort of talking about the choice of your research method, which is kind of I think, something really important that we need to get kind of under our belt as we move forward with you guys' research. Does everyone have a textbook with them, or an online version of this? People, it's gonna be a lot easier if you can look at the graphs. So,
I didn't bring my book. Yeah.
Do you have a? We don't have. Oh, we do have a document camera. We can use that. Then I can't write on the board. I'll just write it out. We'll do it that way. So the graph, if you look at it, has a box up here. And so in a lot of ways, this is both usually where you start and end with your design. Is what are your interests? Which is kind of what we've been talking about, right? Like what topics interest you guys individually, right? You're also going to have some sort of idea, right? As in you're interested in whatever broad topic, and then what we've already talked about in terms of topic authors, we almost automatically have taken the leap from that to having some sort of idea of what we're going to actually research, what variables we're going to look at, or somehow, how are we going to implement that interest of yours into something that's actually a study, right? Follow me so far? And then the other thing that you're going to need to think about, especially if you're thinking about this in terms of doing something statistical, right? In other words, if we're thinking about it, we're going to get back to these words again, nomothetically, right? Deductively. If you're thinking about it deductively, you're going to need to have your theory, what theoretical framework you're going to be using. Even if you're going to work inductively, as in I'm going to go interview people and see what they say, it's not bad to have some idea of some theoretical framework that's going to be, something that you're going to use. So these can be any of the theories that you learn in your, for those of you criminologists, theory of crime, for those of you sociologists, sociological theory, right? Any of those theoretical frameworks you learn, or any of the other sort of big overarching explanations from other classes, right? Generally, you should have some idea of what kind of explanations are out there for the thing that you're interested in and what you might be part of, right? So those are the things that you kind of start with. And from there, from those three things that sort of serve as the center of what you're going to study, right? Your interest, your novel idea, your theoretical framework. You're then going to have to make a few choices. And so the choices that you specifically have to think of is your research method. And we're going to go through some of these today in a sort of cursory way, and then we're going to look at each of these in more depth and how you actually execute them. But you have to think about what method would be good, right, to study the thing that you're interested in, right? You're going to have to think about who, right, you're going to study, the population, right? What is the population you're interested in? How do you get in contact with these people? How do you sample them? What kind of sampling technique are you going to use? We're going to have a whole chapter just on how you sample people. Right? But for the time being, you should be kind of thinking about what is the population I'm interested in, right? We already, once again, even when I had you guys bring up your topics, I was already bringing out those questions sometimes. Well, you know, are you interested in this subset of the population, right? Like, why focus on this rather than more, you could narrow down and do that, like, you know, those sort of questions about who are you studying, right, the population. So those are going to be the first handful of most important questions. Now, there are several different research methods that are commonly used in sociology. And so, we're going to take a moment to think about each of these. So survey research is a very common method used. Does anybody know what survey research is?
When you do a survey, you take a group of people and do a survey on them.
Yeah, and what makes a survey different from other types of methods? What does a survey look like?
Just
Question and answer.
Yeah, it's a series of questions. Sometimes it's open-ended answer, sometimes it's like, you know, we're going to look at different ways of writing your questions on the survey as we go along, right? But essentially, like, you are providing some sort of preset questions, usually a fairly large number of questions, right? And then what you'll do is you'll run data, you'll collect data from handing out that survey. So that's one very common method that you can use, right? This is the best method to use for anything that you're going to run statistics on. We'll look at that. And usually when you see statistics, in some way, shape, or form started as a survey. Even if it's you getting data from the government, it usually started as a survey. Okay, so everyone clear on what survey research is? I know that seems pretty self-explanatory, but we're gonna. Okay, so survey research is a very common one. Field research. Sometimes field research will also be called ethnography. Sometimes it's called, and this is more a certain narrow part of field research, participant observation. Some of you guys are in an ethnography class right now, at least a couple of you, right? Who's in that class right now? Just you two? Do you want to, like, maybe, now that you're back to lab? Yeah. Would you like to, like, try to, like, briefly explain what you do, what sort of things you do in ethnography?
Yeah, so like right now she's having us do this observation thing, which is basically doing field research where we are going into a certain environment and basically either interacting with it or a lot of it is just observing the environment. So it's really like an upfront experience of just seeing how the population that we're observing is interacting with each other or with whatever's going on in the situation.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything? So, like, if you think about, like, probably the archetype of field research, if you think about what anthropologists do, that's field research, right? So anthropologists will go out into the field and they will study all facets of the people, live with them for a while. Like, I used, when I was an undergrad, I went to, I studied in Senegal under an anthropologist. But when he first went, when he was in graduate school, he lived with them for 3 years, right? A group of people for 3 years. You know, and collected information on them. And he literally kind of just went there and observed what was happening. And that's really kind of what field research is. Now, there's varying degrees of how you conduct field research. Some of them are a lot more strict. Some of them are a lot more loose. There's a lot of theories on how to do it. We're going to look at some of those later on, right? But field research is essentially that. It's going out into the field, right? You're going out into the world and you're seeing what happens, right? You're seeing what people do. This could also be like if you wanted to like observe people's behavior at a sporting event, right? Like I know somebody who does studies of NASCAR races. You know, there's a theoretical reason why he does studies of NASCAR races, but he goes to NASCAR races regularly and collects data on NASCAR races, right? So that would be another example of field research, right? You go observation. Make sense? Any questions on field research or survey research so far? And I'm going to expect you, as you move along in your research design, you're going to have to pick one of these to do, right? And as I said, we'll talk about all of them in a lot more detail, but it's good to kind of get an idea of what your choices are. So as we move forward, right, you can be actively thinking about it. So you can do, I'm just moving these off to the side, you can do content analysis. This is what I do. This is what my research usually is. So content analysis is where you have... Hi all. Sorry for this melded together video, but yeah, the camera cut out halfway through our class, so I'm ending, making sure we talk about the final parts of what we were discussing. So that way you guys don't miss out on any of the content. So if you haven't already, please turn to the section in chapter 4. Let me get you the exact page number here. This is on page 114. So we've talked about, and we're moving down these steps, right, from the traditional images in the figure of the traditional image of research design. So essentially this is leading us sort of a flow chart to lead us from basically the point of having an idea, right? Understanding our interest and connecting a theory, which is, you just heard that. It's been a day since I heard it. But anyway, so we talked about conceptualization, we talked about population, who do we study, and we're going through these different choices of research methods. So, and like I said, you'll have to pick one. So so far we've talked about survey research. Survey research is the form of research that's the predominant form of quantitative research, right? Research using numerical data in the social sciences, particularly in sociology, and we talked about field research. I was just starting to talk about content analysis. So content analysis, what you do is you're taking existing things, right? Existing things that people made, pieces of, and this would be the language often of that method, pieces of discourse. And you're sort of systematically analyzing them to see what they include, right? And there's a lot of different ways that content analysis gets done. But so like this could be something like analyzing films, this could be something like analyzing a TV show, novels, commercials, anything like that, right? So the existing data is something that people produce, and then we tease out and find the meaning in it, right? So that's content analysis. And those are the major ones. There's one last that we'll look at in detail, which is the experiments. There's a chapter on experiments. You usually don't do them in sociology, but they're important to know how they work. Because in a lot of ways, particularly survey research is sort of something that gets us close to an experiment, and it's designed to do that, even though often we can't get experimental data on the things we study. We can't put them in a lab, and we'll talk about that in more detail. So once you've made all those choices, you have the research design, what population you're working with, you've created your concepts, you've figured out how you're going to measure them, you've operationalized them, right? At that moment you make your observations. And so you actually hand out your surveys, you actually interview people, you actually go out into the field and make notes, you actually do content analysis. But that's not the end of the study, right? So like from there, an equally important part of the process, and one that we're also going to look at here, is that we have to process our data. So the data in its raw form it's meaningless. So it has to be processed. In qualitative research, this often means a process called coding, which is a way of finding the sort of like central themes in what you've collected, finding what are the different things that your participants have brought up and talked about over and over again. In quantitative research, this data processing involves entering your data, changing variables,
making new variables out of them, right? Dealing with missing data, all those sort of things that you would do. And then finally, you have analysis, right? In in survey research, you have statistical significance, right? That you've determined or not, or failed to determine, right? In qualitative, right, you have to add some interpretation to the things you pulled out of your interviews or pulled out of the content that you're analyzing. And so analysis is the point where that happens, and you provide your actual conclusion. So essentially that's the complete study. At that point you're done. Okay, so that's our basically steps to research design. In this class, when you do your research design, you're going to cut off right before observation. So you're going to design the research, but you're never going to actually implement it. Okay, there's one last thing we have to talk about, and that's nomothetic causality. So there are three things you need to determine nomothetic causality. And nomothetic causality is essentially what most studies are trying, or at least a lot of studies are trying to determine what causes what. This is particularly true of statistics. Statistics is always interested in what causes what. Does being raised in a broken home lead to criminal behavior, right? Does A cause B? And there's three things that you need to develop. One is you need a correlation. So what correlation means is it means that you are confident, that you're mathematically confident, right, that the relationship between A and B, or in other words, the numbers that you get for A and the numbers that you get for B are not due to random chance. And that's actually all we mean when we talk about statistical significance, is to what degree are those numbers random. As in, like, and if they're not random, it means that there's some sort of relationship between the two, right? So there's a relationship between, there's a relationship, like in the example I just gave, there's a relationship between being from a broken home and criminal activity is essentially, if you would very likely find some form of statistical significance for that, right? Some degree of confidence that it's not random, that they're actually related. The second thing you need to determine is time order. So just because two things are related doesn't mean you know which cause they are. The example we gave, the extended example we gave in classes, we were talking about, and this is something that's turned off from the audience, smoking and cancer, right? Often there's a relationship between smoking and cancer. But the fact that you determine that there's a relationship doesn't mean what that relationship is. It could be that, people who have cancer smoke more because it's stressful. It's not true, right? But essentially the idea is the correlation doesn't show us which is which. Instead you need time order, right? So you need to figure out something like, did people smoke before they had cancer? If the smoking predates the cancer, then you can determine causality. Like that's that's what you would have to determine to know which caused which. So after correlation, you have to determine time order. There's a lot of examples of relationships we often assume in the social sciences that don't follow time order. One of the ones I always think of is poverty. Culturally, a lot of times, particularly in the United States, people want to blame poverty on people's laziness. Or people not having good work ethic, or making bad decisions. That's very hard to, and time order would actually point to the fact that usually, in most cases, can't be the case, because most people who are poor were born that way. If they're born that way, right, you can't blame their poverty. You can't explain their poverty with their decisions, right? You can't how hard they work, right? Because those things happened after they were poor. Right? So you'd have to find a different mechanism to explain the causality, right, of being, right, poor. Even if you found a relationship that poor people worked less, which actually isn't true, the working poor generally work more than most people. If you could find a relationship between poverty and, not working, that relationship would likely be the opposite, right? because time as a time-ordered explanation, if somebody was born poor and they don't work very much, right? Their poverty isn't caused by their lack of work, but their lack of work would be caused by their poverty. It would be an easier explanation to make in terms of time order. The last thing is that the relationship has to be non-spurious. And by non-spurious, we mean that there isn't something else causing it, causing both of them, right? And one of the classic examples of a spurious correlation is there's a correlation between ice cream sales and drowning. Ice cream sales don't cause drowning, and drowning doesn't cause ice cream sales. But what it does, but both of them are caused by something else, right? So even though there's a correlation between ice cream sales and drowning, it's because they both happen in the summer. They're correlated to temperature. So like in reality, like the last thing you have to do to determine whether something is caused by something else, A is caused by B, is that there isn't something else, right, that that explains both of those relationships. So those are the three things that you need to develop nomothetic causality. So those are the things that we talked about at the end of class that you missed from the video cutting out, or at least the most important things to take away from it. So thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you soon. I'll keep you updated on the things that are going to happen if we go into quarantine. I'm sure you've heard the question about county health and going into quarantine. If we end up not being able to meet in person, we're probably going to move on to Blackboard Collaborate, and then you guys can actually join us there in real time. So we'll just meet during our normal class time on Blackboard Collaborate. If you have any questions, as always, send me an email and let me know. And if you want to meet by talking on the phone or something of that nature, once again, let me know. We'll set up a meeting time. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Talk to you later. Bye.